Florida has beaches, theme parks, and year-round sunshine, and also a surprisingly large number of places where you are simply not allowed to go. Some are guarded by federal law, some by the military, a few by alligators, which is Florida's version of a security system. These are the 20 most guarded places in Florida you cannot visit. Number 20, Eglin Air Force Base, Valparaiso, Florida. Eglin Air Force Base is the largest Air Force base in the world by total area, roughly 724 square miles of restricted land across the Florida Panhandle. To put that in perspective, it's larger than the state of Rhode Island. It was established in 1935 and became the primary U.S. site for testing and development of air-delivered weapons. The Doolittle Raiders trained at Eglin before their famous 1942 bombing raid on Tokyo. Today, it is home to the Air Force Materiel Command's 96th Test Wing, which tests virtually everything the U.S. Air Force plans to drop from, fire from, or fly. The base encompasses forests, wetlands, the Yellow River, and a significant stretch of the Gulf coastline, all of it off-limits to the public. Hunting and fishing are permitted in specific areas through a carefully managed access program, but that's about as close as civilians get to most of it. The weapons testing ranges within Eglin are among the most restricted pieces of land in the country. The installation also encompasses 3 auxiliary airfields and an overwater range extending 97,000 square miles into the Gulf of Mexico. What's being developed and tested there at any given time is classified. The airspace above large portions of northwest Florida is permanently restricted, and the sheer scale of the installation means it effectively walls off a significant chunk of the Panhandle from public access, without most people who live in the region even noticing. Number 19, Patrick Space Force Base, Brevard County, Florida. Patrick Space Force Base sits on Florida's Space Coast in Brevard County, adjacent to Cape Canaveral. It serves as the headquarters of the Space Launch Delta 45, which manages launches from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and the Eastern Range, the corridor of airspace and ocean over which U.S. rockets travel after launch. The base was originally established as a naval air station in 1940 and transitioned to Air Force use after World War II. It became one of the anchor installations of America's space program, and today it plays a direct operational role in every launch from the Cape, military, NASA, and commercial alike. The operational areas are completely restricted. Public access to the base itself requires sponsorship from active personnel. The launch ranges and control facilities have their own layers of security beyond that. What the public sees, rocket launches from beach viewing areas miles away, is the only view permitted. The base also houses several tenant organizations whose specific functions are not publicly disclosed. It's a Space Force installation in Florida. The level of transparency is predictably minimal. Number 18, Avon Park Air Force Range, Highlands County, Florida. The Avon Park Air Force Range sits in the middle of the Florida Peninsula in Highlands County and has been an active military installation since World War II. It covers approximately 106,000 acres of scrub, wetlands, and open terrain used for air-to-ground weapons testing and tactical training. Aircraft from bases across the southeastern United States use Avon Park's ranges to practice bombing runs, strafing passes, and precision strike exercises. The terrain beneath them is peppered with unexploded ordnance accumulated over 80-plus years of use. That alone disqualifies it as a hiking destination. Like Eglin, Avon Park offers limited public access, hunting and fishing in designated areas during specific periods through a managed program, but the ranges themselves and the airspace above them during active operations are strictly off-limits. The installation is also home to one of the more significant Florida ecosystems sitting inside a military boundary, Florida scrub habitat, one of the most endangered ecosystems in the state. The military's restrictions have, somewhat accidentally, made it one of the better preserved examples of that environment left in Central Florida. Number 17, MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. MacDill Air Force Base occupies the tip of the Interbay Peninsula in Tampa Bay, a geographic position that makes it essentially a secure island connected to Tampa by a single guarded access road. You cannot accidentally end up at MacDill. There is no through traffic. The base is home to two of the most operationally significant commands in the U.S. military: United States Central Command, which oversees military operations across the Middle East, Central Asia, and East Africa, and United States Special Operations Command, which coordinates special operations forces across all branches of the military. In practical terms, MacDill is the headquarters for the planning and execution of American military operations across an enormous portion of the globe. The security posture reflects that. Access requires verified credentials, scheduled visits, and clearance through multiple checkpoints. The base also houses the 6th Air Refueling Wing, which operates KC-135 and KC-46 tanker aircraft. The fuel that keeps American aircraft flying on missions worldwide is managed in part from this peninsula in Tampa Bay. It is a pleasant location, by all accounts, and entirely inaccessible to the general public. Number 16, Whiting Field Naval Air Station, Milton, Florida. Naval Air Station. Whiting Field in Santa Rosa County is the primary training base for U.S. Navy and Marine Corps helicopter pilots. It has been operating in that role since 1943, making it one of the longest, continuously operating military flight training installations in the country. The base trains more helicopter pilots than any other installation in the United States. Every Navy and Marine pilot who flies a rotary wing aircraft has, at some point, passed through Whiting Field's training programs. Access is restricted to authorized personnel and their guests. The flight training operations mean the airspace over a significant area surrounding the base is regularly restricted as well. Civilians in the Milton area are accustomed to the near-constant sound of training helicopters overhead. It's simply the background noise of living near Whiting Field. The base itself is unremarkable in appearance. What happens inside, the volume and consistency of military aviator training, is what makes it operationally significant, and what makes the access restrictions non-negotiable. Number 15, Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, Titusville, Florida. Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge occupies roughly 140,000 acres on and around the same barrier island as Kennedy Space Center. It was established in 1963, the same year Kennedy Space Center began operations, and the two have coexisted ever since. A NASA launch facility, and a federally protected wildlife refuge sharing a piece of Florida coastline. Large portions of the refuge are open to the public. Wildlife drives, fishing areas, and hiking trails are accessible and well used. But significant sections are permanently off limits, either because they fall within active NASA security boundaries or because they are designated as critical wildlife habitat that requires zero human disturbance. The restricted areas include some of the most significant coastal habitat on Florida's Atlantic side. Manatees, bald eagles, loggerhead sea turtles, and scrub jays inhabit the restricted zones. The no-access areas are enforced by a combination of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service rangers and, where they overlap with NASA property, by federal law enforcement with rather more authority. The result is one of the more unusual arrangements in Florida conservation: protected habitat that is also, functionally, a buffer zone for rocket launches. Number 14, Kennedy Space Center's Restricted Launch Complexes, Merritt Island, Florida. Kennedy Space Center itself has a well-known visitor complex, and the public can tour significant portions of the facility. But the operational launch complexes, particularly those currently active, are not among the things tourists get close to. Launch Complex 39A and 39B, the historic pads from which the Apollo missions and Space Shuttle launches took place, are now leased and operated by SpaceX and NASA respectively. Access to the pad areas is restricted to credentialed NASA and contractor personnel. During launch operations, exclusion zones extend for miles in every direction, a 3-mile radius minimum for the public, with larger zones depending on the vehicle and payload. The Vehicle Assembly Building, one of the largest buildings in the world by volume, at approximately 129 million cubic feet, is similarly off-limits to public tours during active operations. Launch preparation work on rockets destined for orbital missions takes place inside it under security protocols that don't include visitor windows. The building is large enough to develop its own interior weather patterns on humid Florida days, a fact that the engineers who work inside it find less charming than it sounds. The Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex offers an impressive experience of space history. What it doesn't offer is access to the active infrastructure of American spaceflight, which continues to operate behind fences, credentials, and launch day exclusion zones that no amount of enthusiasm will get you through. Number 13. Homestead Air Reserve Base, Miami-Dade County, Florida. Homestead Air Reserve Base sits at the southern end of Miami-Dade County near the northern edge of Everglades National Park. It was largely destroyed by Hurricane Andrew in August 1992, one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to strike the continental United States, and was subsequently downsized from an active-duty installation to an air reserve base during the post-Cold War military restructuring of the early 1990s. Today, it is home to the 482nd Fighter Wing, which flies F-16 Fighting Falcons. The base is also used as a staging area for counter-drug operations in South Florida and the Caribbean, given its proximity to drug trafficking corridors. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations has a significant presence at Homestead. Standard military base access restrictions apply. The base perimeter is fenced and patrolled. Unauthorized access is a federal offense. And given the base's role in counter-drug interdiction, the security posture is treated with corresponding seriousness by the agencies operating there. Number 12. Tyndall Air Force Base, Bay County, Florida. Tyndall Air Force Base in Bay County was, like Homestead, severely damaged by a major hurricane. In Tyndall's case, Hurricane Michael in October 2018. A Category 5 storm that made landfall almost directly over the base. The damage was catastrophic, destroying or severely damaging a significant portion of the installation's structures and aircraft. Rebuilding efforts began almost immediately and have been ongoing since. Tyndall is being reconstructed as what the Air Force describes as a base of the future. A smart base incorporating advanced technology in infrastructure, energy, and operations. Several F-22 Raptor stealth fighters based at Tyndall were not evacuated before Michael's landfall and were significantly damaged. The base is home to the 325th Fighter Wing and its F-35A Lightning II aircraft, which are in the process of replacing the F-22s that were Tyndall's primary aircraft before the hurricane. The installation is a restricted military facility. Public access, unsurprisingly, is not part of the reconstruction plan. Number 11. The Dry Tortugas beyond Fort Jefferson, Monroe County, Florida. The Dry Tortugas is a small archipelago roughly 70 miles west of Key West, accessible only by seaplane or boat, a 3-hour ferry ride at minimum. Most visitors know it as a national park centered on Fort Jefferson, a massive 19th century coastal fortress. What fewer people know is that large portions of the Dry Tortugas are off-limits, even within the national park boundaries. Significant sections are designated as research natural areas, where public access is prohibited to protect nesting seabird colonies and coral reef ecosystems. The loggerhead sea turtle nesting beaches on several of the smaller keys are seasonally closed. Bush Key, adjacent to Garden Key where Fort Jefferson stands, closes every year during the magnificent frigate bird and sooty tern nesting season. The waters surrounding the more remote keys are also designated as no-take marine zones with access restrictions. The Dry Tortugas is already remote enough that it filters out most casual visitors. The restricted areas within it represent some of the least visited and least disturbed marine habitat in the continental United States. Number 10. The Everglades Research Zones, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties. Everglades National Park itself is largely open to the public. Hiking, canoeing, and driving the main road through the park are all accessible. But the park also contains significant wilderness zones that require permits for entry and certain research and restoration areas that are entirely closed to the public. The restricted zones include active restoration sites where hydrological work is underway to reverse decades of water management decisions that damage the natural flow of water through the system. These sites need to be free of human disturbance while the ecosystems reestablish themselves. Several areas within the park's backcountry are restricted due to active crocodile and alligator nesting, rare wading bird colonies, and ghost orchid habitats. The ghost orchid, one of the rarest plants in North America, grows in remote, difficult-to-access cypress strands, some of which are protected from any entry to prevent both collection and accidental trampling. As former park superintendent Dan Kimball once noted, the Everglades is not a theme park. The wilderness zones are wilderness, and keeping them that way is the whole point. Number 9. Southcom Headquarters, Doral, Florida. United States Southern Command, known as Southcom, is the unified combatant command responsible for U.S. military operations in Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. Its headquarters is located in Doral, a city west of Miami, in a purpose-built, secure campus that opened in 2008 after relocating from its former home at Quarry Heights in Panama. The facility is not a traditional military base in appearance. There are no aircraft, no weapons ranges, no obvious military hardware visible from the street. What it is, operationally, is the nerve center of American military engagement across an enormous swath of the Western Hemisphere. Intelligence operations, counter-narcotics coordination, disaster response planning, and military-to-military partnerships with dozens of countries are all managed from this campus. Access is restricted to credentialed personnel and cleared visitors. The building itself is designed with physical security in mind. Reinforced construction, controlled perimeters, and access systems appropriate to a facility that handles classified operations. It is one of those places that looks from the outside like an unremarkable office park and functions, on the inside, as something considerably more significant. The contrast between the Doral strip malls surrounding it and what actually happens inside is genuinely disorienting if you stop to think about it. Number 8. Egmont Key State Park Restricted Areas, Hillsborough County, Florida. Egmont Key is a small island at the mouth of Tampa Bay, accessible only by boat. It is home to a state park, a national wildlife refuge, and the ruins of Fort Dade, a fortification built during the Spanish-American War era in the late 1890s. The accessible portions of the island are genuinely worth the boat trip. Clear water, gopher tortoises wandering the old fort ruins, and a lighthouse that has been operating since 1858. The restricted portions are where it gets more complicated. Significant sections of the island are closed due to gopher tortoise nesting habitat and shorebird nesting colonies. The beach areas used by least terns and black skimmers for nesting are roped off and enforced during nesting season. Additional areas are closed due to structural instability in the old military fortifications, underground tunnels, and deteriorating brick structures that are genuinely dangerous to enter. The island is also eroding rapidly due to changed tidal patterns from the construction of the Tampa Bay Ship Channel. Several sections that were accessible in past decades are now underwater or unstable shoreline. Number 7. Turkey Point Nuclear Generating Station, Miami-Dade County, Florida. Turkey Point Nuclear Generating Station sits on the shore of Biscayne Bay in Miami-Dade County, operated by Florida Power and Light. It has been generating nuclear power since 1972 and currently operates 2 pressurized water reactors as well as 2 natural gas units. Nuclear generating stations are, by federal regulation, among the most secure non-military facilities in the United States. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission mandates layered security, including armed guards, vehicle barriers, access control systems, and a protected area that no unauthorized person may enter under any circumstances. The plant also sits adjacent to a 168 square mile cooling canal system, a network of shallow canals where reactor cooling water circulates before being returned to use. The cooling canals have become, somewhat improbably, a significant habitat for the American crocodile, a federally threatened species. The warm water suits them. There are an estimated 50 or more crocodiles living in the canal system. So Turkey Point has federal armed security on one side and crocodiles on the other. Entry without authorization is both illegal and, depending on which perimeter you breach, potentially terminal. Number 6. Camp Blanding Joint Training Center, Clay County, Florida. Camp Blanding has been a military training installation in Clay County since 1939. It was one of the largest training camps in the country during World War II, processing hundreds of thousands of soldiers before deployment to both the European and Pacific theaters. A small city of temporary structures grew up on the site during the war years. Today, it operates as a joint training center for the Florida Army National Guard and serves as a mobilization station for Reserve and National Guard units deploying overseas. The installation covers approximately 73,000 acres of North Florida terrain, pine forests, wetlands, and upland habitat used for combat training exercises. Like Avon Park, the terrain contains unexploded ordnance accumulated from decades of training. That's not a deterrent so much as a flat prohibition on wandering. Public access to Camp Blanding is essentially non-existent outside of a small museum on the property that preserves the installation's World War II history. The training ranges and operational areas are restricted by military authority. The Clay County area around the installation is rural enough that the base boundaries can be easy to approach without realizing it, which is exactly why the signs and fencing are as explicit as they are. Number 5. The Boca Chica Naval Air Station, Monroe County, Florida. Naval Air Station Key West at Boca Chica Field occupies a key just east of Key West and serves as a jet training facility and tactical support installation. Its location? At the southernmost tip of the continental United States, directly in the approaches to the Florida Straits, gives it strategic significance beyond its relatively modest size. The base handles air intercept training, anti-submarine warfare exercises, and serves as a staging point for operations in the Caribbean and Gulf approaches. U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Coast Guard both operate out of the base in support of interdiction operations in the Straits. The Florida Keys location means the base sits amid one of the most visited tourist areas in the state. You can see military aircraft from the highway. You cannot visit the base. The contrast between the relaxed Key West atmosphere a few miles west and the restricted military installation is a peculiar feature of the lower Keys. Number 4. Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve Restricted Zones, Collier County, Florida. Rookery Bay sits just south of Naples in Collier County, one of the last undisturbed black mangrove estuaries on Florida's southwest coast. The research reserve covers over 110,000 acres of mangrove forest, seagrass beds, and shallow coastal habitat. Most of the reserve is accessible to kayakers, boaters, and hikers through a well-managed trail and waterway system. The restricted portions are the core research areas, zones where long-term ecological monitoring is conducted and where human disturbance of any kind would compromise the data. These areas include nesting rookeries for wading birds, herons, egrets, roseate spoonbills, and wood storks, where any human presence during nesting season causes birds to abandon nests. The damage from a single unauthorized visit to an active rookery can cascade through an entire breeding season. The reserve is managed jointly by NOAA and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and the restricted zone enforcement is taken seriously by both agencies. A roseate spoonbill doesn't care how good your zoom lens is. The rangers care a great deal about whether you got close enough to need one. Number 3, Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge, Brevard and Indian River Counties, Florida. The Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge stretches along 20.5 miles of Atlantic coastline in Brevard and Indian River counties and protects one of the most significant sea turtle nesting beaches in the Western Hemisphere. Loggerhead, green, and leatherhead sea turtles nest here in numbers that make this beach one of the most biologically active stretches of sand in North America during nesting season. The refuge is closed to the public entirely from May 1st through October 31st. the nesting and hatching season. During those 6 months, the beach is patrolled by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officers and trained volunteer monitors. Nests are flagged, GPS recorded, and checked regularly. Lighting restrictions apply to all adjacent properties, hotels, condominiums, and private residences, to prevent hatchling disorientation when they emerge at night and navigate toward the water by the relative brightness of the open horizon. Even during the open months, access is limited and regulated. The refuge was established specifically because the nesting beach requires near-total protection to remain viable. Nighttime access year-round is prohibited. The penalty for disturbing a sea turtle nest or hatchling is a federal offense under the Endangered Species Act, with fines that start at $50,000 per violation and climb from there. This is a beach. A beautiful, accessible-looking Florida beach with clear Atlantic water and the kind of sky you'd put on a postcard. And from May through October, you simply cannot go there. Number 2. The Lake City VAS, a medical center classified research wing, Columbia County, Florida. The Lake City 5, a medical center in Columbia County, operates as a standard veterans healthcare facility for most of its functions. It is a Department of Veterans Affairs hospital, subject to the standard access policies of VA facilities, open to veterans receiving care, their families, and authorized staff. What is less publicly discussed is the research infrastructure at certain VA medical centers, including dedicated research wings where clinical trials and medical studies are conducted. These areas are restricted under a combination of federal medical privacy law, research ethics protocols, and institutional security policies. Patient privacy alone is sufficient legal basis for restricting access to active medical research facilities. Add the federal nature of VA property, trespassing on VA grounds is a federal offense, and the security apparatus that governs clinical research, and the result is a wing of a hospital that is as effectively off-limits as most of the military installations on this list. The research conducted at VA facilities includes studies on traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, prosthetics, and other areas directly relevant to veteran care. The restricted access protects both the integrity of that research and the privacy of the veterans participating in it. Number 1. The tunnel network beneath Walt Disney World, Orange County, Florida. Walt Disney World's most famously guarded secret isn't a vault or a classified facility, it's a tunnel system that runs beneath the entire Magic Kingdom and possibly other areas of the property that the general public has essentially never had access to. The tunnels, officially called utilidors, short for utility corridors, were designed by Walt Disney's Imagineers before the park opened in 1971. Disney had observed that at Disneyland in California, costumed characters and operational staff were visible moving between areas of the park, breaking the themed immersion. In Florida, the solution was to build the park on top of a network of corridors that allow cast members, supplies, costumes, and equipment to move around the entire property without ever appearing on the guest-facing areas. The utilidors are, technically, at ground level. The park itself is built on an elevated berm, so what appears to be underground is actually the original ground floor of the property. They contain break rooms, a cafeteria, wardrobe facilities, a computer nerve center, and miles of pneumatic trash tubes that remove waste from the park without a single garbage truck appearing in Fantasyland. Access is strictly limited to Disney employees and credentialed contractors. Guests do not enter the utilidors. The company has, over the decades, permitted limited media access for specific documentary purposes, enough for the public to know the tunnels exist and roughly what they contain, but not enough for anyone to navigate them freely. Disney owns approximately 25,000 acres in Orange and Osceola counties, more land than San Francisco. The company operates its own utilities, its own fire department, and its own building codes under a special legislative district called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, established in 1967, which was renamed the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District in 2023 following a public dispute with the state government. On that entire property, almost nothing is off limits to guests except the utilidors, which makes them, in their own way, the most effectively guarded place in Florida. Not with guns or fences, but with a mouse and a very firm employee handbook. From nuclear plants guarded by crocodiles to Disney tunnels patrolled by cast members in character costumes, Florida's restricted places cover about every category you can think of: military, environmental, federal, and corporate. Most of these exist for entirely legitimate reasons. A few of them exist because someone, somewhere, decided you really didn't need to know. Either way, you're not getting in. These are the 20 most guarded places in Florida you cannot visit. If you found this worth watching, hit like and subscribe. More of this coming.